All right. So, as I talked about earlier in the podcast, every week we are going to try to have a guest on each week to share their story, share their unique individual journey in hockey. And this week we're lucky to be joined by someone I know personally. We ended up playing together in Norway, and right now he is actually on the Selber Wölfe, the team I worked for. But please welcome to the Pro Hockey Pod, Bryce Reddick. Bryce, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Honored to be the first guest.
Yeah, there's no pressure there. So if this thing doesn't take off, then we know who to blame.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I wanted to basically talk to you about is I basically have a list of questions or comments, if you want to call them that, about 20 of them. But I wanted to just kind of hear about your story, where it began, maybe some of the influences you had and kind of stuff you learned along the way. And then at the end, there's one question I'm going to ask every guest, and I want to just kind of hear their unique opinion on it. But first, let's start off, back when Bryce was born. So you were born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. How long did you end up living there for?
So my dad played for the Jets. That's obviously why I was born there. My mom is from Winnipeg. I honestly don't know how long, but we used to go back there in the summers quite a bit. But the majority of my childhood was definitely spent in Vegas. But I would say probably anywhere from 3 to 5 years, just because if you look at my dad's elite prospects, basically wherever he was is where we were for the first probably 12 to 13 years of my life. So there's a lot of bouncing around, um, as you know, in this lifestyle. And it's something I have always had in my life.
So first, what I wanted to ask you about, like, so Vegas, like, I mean, now it's a little more common. Obviously, the Knights are the Golden Knights are there, and then also the Henderson Silver Knights, I believe, are not too far away. But when you were growing up in Vegas, I would say, like, was hockey as big as it maybe is now there, or was there not so much going on in terms of hockey?
There was hardly any hockey. They did have the old IHL team, the Las Vegas Thunder, which was, I think, equivalent now to like the American Hockey League with the skill level of guys they had there. But in terms of minor hockey, there was maybe, I would say, at most three ice sheets at one time. And like at my schools, I was the only kid that was playing hockey. Um, Actually, there was maybe one or two. There's probably two or three of us that played hockey, but it was the same thing. Our dads played, um, so it was there was no hockey there. And I mean, now, as you know, with the Golden Knights and the Silver Knights being there, it's just exploded with the amount of kids that are now playing. So I'm sure in maybe 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a lot of maybe a handful of kids in the NHL that are grew up playing in Vegas.
So would you say, I guess my question would be, when you first started learning to play hockey, would that be more have been in Winnipeg because your dad was obviously at the time, for those not who do not know who are listening, Bryce's dad was a goalie in the NHL for some years. Obviously won a Stanley Cup too, if you want to look that up online. But he would have been at Winnipeg in the time when you were just kind of learning to, walk and eventually put the skates on.
Yeah, so organized hockey was for sure Vegas and Michigan. If you see there, my dad played in Grand Rapids too. So my first couple of years of organized hockey was Vegas and Michigan. But then, as I'm sure you too, as soon as we started to walk, we learned to skate. So I think that was probably in Edmonton or Winnipeg.
Very curious how the travel schedule would have been if you were starting minor hockey in Vegas. I mean, there can't or there couldn't have been many teams close by. I mean, you feel like you'd have to be doing a lot of traveling back then.
Oh yeah, it was always California every weekend. We were in Southern California, LA, Anaheim, Riverside, another smaller city there. And then Utah, we would go to Salt Lake, Provo, and then Phoenix as well. So it was all in that Southwest area. And then as we got a little bit older, we started to venture out. We went to a couple tournaments in Quebec. I think we went to Michigan maybe, but that wasn't until we got to like Bantam, Pee Wee age.
Mhm. And before we talk about, once you're getting up to that Bantam age, obviously your dad, as we said, like he was able to play in the NHL, and maybe talk a little bit about like kind of his playing career. Were you always there along with him, or were you and your other family members somewhere else?
Yeah, so he played, I think it was like 18 years professional. So he played for a long, long time. And we went, me and my sister and mom, we went everywhere except for the end of his career. He actually came over to Germany, and that was the only place we didn't end up going. At the time, I was in middle school, and my sister was, she was mid elementary school, I think second or third grade. So it would have been hard for us to come over um, at that age and not know the language and be just thrown into school. So that was the only place we didn't go. But we were Edmonton, Fort Wayne, Florida, Cincinnati, Las Vegas, Grand Rapids. So my childhood was spent in a lot of different places. Um, like a lot of the kids now that or guys that have kids now, I'm sure they'll go through the same thing. So I mean, it's cool. It's cool for me to look back on and say I lived in all these places, and then I also can share some of the experience with my dad that he had when he was playing. So it's cool.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Just kind of, how much influence would you say that your dad had on you, obviously sticking with hockey as long as you have? And he obviously had his own unique journey, and you are still on yours right now. It's still going. So how much influence did he have, or like any things that come to mind that maybe he helped you get through, especially early on?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely the reason why I play. That's pretty clear. Him and my uncle were both professional players, so I mean, it's kind of in the blood, I guess you could say. But yeah, he helped me a lot when I was younger in college. Like I had a tough experience in college just with playing and injury, so he definitely played a huge part in helping me get through that. But he never pushed me to play. It was always do what you want, and if hockey's what you want, I'll help you and guide you. So it was a very healthy and good relationship. It wasn't I played hockey, you're going to play hockey. So it was good. I learned to love the game on my own, which is good, and I think that's what all kids who have dads who play any sport, that's something that they should pick up on their own. They should never be forced to play, because I think that takes the dedication and love and doing the extra, going the extra mile to be successful. I think that takes it out of it, and it turns it into a job a lot quicker than it should be.
No, I agree. It's a lot of times, whether it's parents or even us ourselves, we forget that there's a reason we started playing this game. It was to have fun. It was for a passion, and not just putting so much pressure on it that it does feel like a job. Then it takes kind of the enjoy out of it. But I wanted to ask you about you know we obviously had different junior careers. You were able to go play in the BCHL. I played in the OJHL back at the time. I had a chance to go to the BCHL the one year. I was possibly going to go to Vernon, but I ended up saying no. And evidently, Vernon had a goalie, just some no-name guy named Andrew Hammond, play for them. So um, probably a good decision there. But I wanted to ask you about your time in the BCHL. How was it as a league? How was your experience?
I loved it. It was good. We had a really good group of guys. My first year we were a lot older, and then my second year we were almost a midget age team. So it was cool to have a lot of guys around your age. Um, but I was in high school for both of my junior years, so I didn't really get to experience hockey without school until my first year pro. So I mean, I didn't have, I guess, like the quote regular junior hockey experience. So it was a lot of, definitely learn how to manage my time, because I was obviously a full-time student in high school and then playing junior hockey, as you know how demanding the schedule is. So I mean, the league was very good. There was numerous NHL players in the league at that time. Jamie, Jordy Ben, Kyle Turris was there, Brad Hunt, Andrew Hammond, as you said, Tyler Bozak. Like there was a a lot of good players in the league at that time. So it was definitely cool now looking back to say that I got to play against those guys early on in their careers.
It was definitely one of those leagues that I felt, it was basically rivaling at the time. Like it was BCHL or USHL. So those are probably the two I would say, uh, leagues that really a lot of guys tried to go to because they felt that it would best prepare them for whatever the next step was for them, whether it was pro hockey or going NCAA. Speaking of NCAA, you were able to get a D1 scholarship. How did that feel? And was it always, your plan to go NCAA, or had you ever thought about playing major junior? And I guess the other question would be, how many schools had interest in you, or maybe even offered you that you were deciding between?
Yeah, so I actually did want to play Major Junior when I was younger. I really wanted to play Major Junior actually, but my mom and dad they put the kibosh on that. They said, no, college, get your education, which in hindsight now, I'm so glad they pushed me in that direction because as you know, it's tough when you come out of junior at 20 years old rather than you're coming out of college at 22 to 24. It just changes your trajectory completely. So I'm glad I ended up going that route. But yeah, I had quite a few schools talking to me at the time. I think it was Bowling Green, Michigan Tech, obviously Michigan Tech, Brown, Yale. Yale was that was never going to happen with school, but the Alaska schools, Fairbanks and Anchorage, Mankato. I had quite a few, but Michigan Tech was the only one who wanted me to come in as a true freshman, and that was a goal of mine. So that's the reason why I ended up deciding to take that offer. In hindsight, I wasn't ready to go, but I guess everything happens for a reason. And yeah, the first 3 years were really tough, and we got a new coach, and he changed everything, and it was a lot more enjoyable that last season.
Yeah, you briefly touched on your experience, so I guess I don't really need to go into that question. You also touched on how you had some injuries and stuff, but you just raised a point that I like talking or like asking guys. So, there's always that debate. Well, there's always two debates, I would say. The first debate is go major junior and go NCAA. I think you can make arguments for each side. But there's always a debate, what age is the best to go to college? I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but for me, for example, as a goalie, we're always told we develop or mature at a later age, and it's always better to go maybe if you're 20 or 21. I went kind of like you, like I took a year off in between high school and university, and I felt like I wasn't ready at the time. But looking back on it, would you say you should have played one more year of junior, maybe even two?
At least, yeah, one more for sure. Maybe, as you said too. I mean, I wasn't ready. In junior, like you're playing against still boys, and then when you get to college, you're playing against full grown men. Who, I mean, you got the seniors there who have been working out for 4 full years already, and then you're coming from junior where some kids are just starting to learn to work out. They don't know their bodies yet, so it's just, yeah. It obviously, like you said, it depends on the guy and the player. There's some guys who like obviously like hockey maturity wise, they're just on another level, and those are the true freshmen that end up staying at school for a year and then you see them in the NHL the next year, and that obviously was not me. Um, I mean, some of our best players at school were 21-year-old freshmen, and they went on to have probably the best careers out of any of us that came in early. So I mean, it definitely depends on the guy. And I think if you're going to one of the quote lower schools, not one of the bigger schools, it's probably better that you do go in at an older age because you're probably not considered a top prospect. I mean, that's probably blunt to say, but in all reality, I think it's better to be realistic than to be unrealistic.
Did you ever, because obviously the rule in NCAA is, I forget what it was, if it was 7 or 10 games. there's the ability to, if you have an injury or things aren't working out, you're not getting enough ice time, you're able to redshirt. Did you ever consider that in one of your maybe first 2 years where you thought, hey, maybe it's better if I just kind of take the year off and just focus on, school and stuff, and then I would get an extra year at college?
So my senior year, we ended up getting a coach, Mel Pearson. He was the coach at Michigan the last few years. He actually tried to get me a red shirt for my junior year, I believe it was. I got really sick and spent some time in the hospital. So he tried to get me a red shirt for that year. The school did, but the NCAA ended up saying no because I played a couple games after the new year. But I mean, I would have loved to get that extra year just to see what would have happened. But I mean, everything happens for a reason, and I didn't end up getting it. And I mean, I'm not upset about it. It's just who knows what would have happened with that extra year and my development there.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it's kind of the what if game. One thing transitioning now, so after Michigan Tech, you obviously went on to play pro both North America and then over in Europe. So we played against each other when you were in Brest. I was in Marzine, and then the next year we were roommates together in Norway. You obviously had a tremendous season that year, off to Aalborg after that in Denmark, and then 3 years in Cardiff. One thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about is, what are the major differences you noticed between, the North American pro game and the different European country pro games that you would have played in? Because obviously, after college, you went right away to the coast and a little bit in the central, and then after that, it was, playing in France, playing in Norway, playing in Denmark, playing in England, as I said. And these are all different leagues. Like, they're not all the same type of hockey, not even the same rink measurements in some of the leagues. So what would you say the biggest differences were?
I would say for sure the structure in terms of systems in I would say France, Norway, Denmark, and even here, it's not even close to the structure wise that we had in the UK and North America. The UK is like there you have your 15 imports, which are mostly North American guys because you're obviously living in an English speaking country. So that makes it more attractive for the older guys with the kids and the wives to come over there because like I brought up earlier to you is when my dad came over to Germany, it was hard. We couldn't come because of the schooling. So you have your older imports in the UK who can bring their kids over, put them into school, and there's no transition period for the kids. It doesn't make it difficult on them. So that makes it a very North American style game in terms of the physicality, the systems, the structure, even the toughness. It's just a completely different game. They're very, very North American. Um, and then you got here, or not here, but North America, or France, Norway, Denmark, and then obviously here where it's not as much structure and you more rely on your skill to take over, which is fun to a certain extent, but it's a different style of hockey. It's every culture has differences, and this is the sport difference.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you raise a lot of good points there, and I think too, it's the North American game itself, like a lot of those, especially a lot of those coaches, they've started somewhere, so they've either played a long time pro, and then, just for an example, they've started in major junior or NCAA and learned how to coach and how to, maybe not how to coach is the right word, but how to communicate their experiences, and so that players can learn from their experiences and learn what they're teaching, because that's sometimes I feel something that's forgotten is, you can be a good coach, but it doesn't mean you're a good communicator or that people are going to be able to learn from you, because maybe you just don't know how to communicate it. And that's, I think, one of the perfect examples of that was maybe Wayne Gretzky. I mean, he was the best player to ever play the game, and I don't think he was able to teach guys how he was so good, or when he was in Arizona, because he just was at a different level, or maybe didn't have the communication skills that some of the players needed. But that's something that, yeah, I think is definitely, I think it's picking up in Europe. It's definitely come a long way since I think the 10 years we played or whatever it is, 8 years we've been over here. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. That's a huge difference. Before we transition away from Europe, I just wanted to ask two quick questions. Favorite place you have lived in Europe and favorite place you have traveled in Europe?
Those are good questions. Actually, a lot of people do ask me that, and I would say, is it a full package or just experience wise? Like full package meaning hockey, teammates, everything, or just like experience?
No, I'm just I guess my question is, so for favorite place you've played, like could be just like based on the city and stuff, and then favorite place you traveled, obviously, like I'm assuming that's something you did on one of the Olympic breaks or something while being over here.
Okay, so Cardiff was definitely that was my top place just because we had the 15, like I said, the 15 imports. They were all North Americans, and then you have the British guys, which are like they're awesome guys, unbelievable. Some of my best friends are actually still playing there, and one of them is actually British. Not that that means anything, but we just had an unbelievable group of guys. We have our group chat still to this day. That was the COVID year. So what, 4 years, 3 years ago now, still is going off every other day. Just awesome group of guys. We were obviously a very, very good team, played in the Champions League there 3 years, um, and won numerous championships there. So that would definitely be my top place just from the experiences that I had there. And then in terms of travel, my favorite place that I've been would probably have been Rome when uh, I was playing in Denmark, one of the Olympic breaks. Me and my ex-wife, we went to Rome, and that was very cool. I'm a history guy, as you know, so it was cool to see all the Colosseum and all that other stuff there.
Yeah, I've been there as well. It's very cool to see that stuff, and I always find it cool is trying to imagine what it looked like back in the time that it would have been built or when it was active. So you see it in maybe like pictures or like in movies. Sometimes they try to recreate it, but it never fully gives you that full wow factor until you actually go see it. So I can definitely agree with you on that. Um, Transitioning now back. So after Europe, you obviously went back to the East Coast. Two things I wanted to ask you about that. So one, there's this common I don't know how to say it, I guess quote about the ECHL, like you're doing the ECHL grind, the cheese toast, whatever you want to call it. Can you comment a bit on that? So some of the listeners, maybe we have some young listeners here that are playing junior, maybe in college, who are potentially thinking about doing that after they're done.
Yeah, I mean it is a grind. I mean the travel, there's a lot of travel. I think it's more so of a grind when you're a professional because it's not the biggest paycheck, but I mean at the end of the day you're playing hockey for a living. You I was in a great spot, like unbelievable weather, awesome apartments, great teammates. So I mean it was a grind, but it really wasn't a grind at the same time, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I think the hockey is very underrated. There's a lot of good players that play in the ECHL. I mean, you look at the leading scorer from, I think he's 2 years ago. Now he plays in the KHL. So it's like, there's a lot of guys there that aren't there deservingly so. They ended up there. They just fell through the radar, fell through the cracks, and they're there and they get their chance over here. And I mean, they more than take advantage of it. So I mean, it's a hard league to make a name for yourself in just because the turnover is so high. And then it's obviously you have your NHL, AHL contracts coming down, and so it's a tough league to play in, but it is at the end of the day it is rewarding if you do well and you end up sticking around because you do create some very good friendships there.
What is maybe one thing or a couple things you would recommend to guys? So you just talked about it. There's a lot of turnover in this league, and especially when you're not on a whatever it is, entry level contract or AHL two-way contract. So for guys who are strictly on an East Coast contract, like what kind of advice would you recommend to those guys to, as we just talked about, grinding their way through? Because some guys are gonna get these contracts and it could be 2 weeks and then someone gets sent down and they're either in the stands or they're being traded somewhere or they're sent home. So what would you recommend to guys like that? Because obviously you were one of those guys. You didn't have a you weren't NHL drafted, you didn't have a NHL contract or AHL two-way.
Yeah, I mean, you got to find your intangibles. As cliche as that is, you got to find something that not everyone else can do. I mean, I'm not saying anyone to do this, but my first couple of years in North America is I was willing to fight, and I was a little guy, so I mean it showed. I mean I think it showed the coaches like, well, this guy really wants to be here. He's smaller guy, like he's willing to stand up for himself and his teammates. So I think that helped me out my first couple of years. But I mean, if that's it could be for other guys really good at killing penalties, really good at taking face-offs, like an awesome guy in the locker room. Like you bring energy to the rink every day. You're fun to be around. It doesn't even have to be hockey stuff. It's just like bringing like Paul Bissonnette. I think he's a good example for the NHL. Like he had the career he had, not because of his like hockey, but just he's an awesome guy. He's such a personality. Guys love being around him. So I mean, there's all different sorts of intangibles that different guys can bring. It's just you got to find what's going to be your niche.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And especially for you who was a player, I think I always look back to me. It was different as a goalie because there's only, each team has two goalies normally, and normally one of them is someone under a contract, with the top team or the AHL team. So it's even tougher. But for someone like you, as you said, you were smaller, fresh out of college, and you just kind of did whatever it took to kind of gain that respect. So I think a lot of guys would tip their caps to you for that. Another thing I wanted to ask you about. So when you came back from Europe, you obviously had a very unique opportunity. So for those who are listening right now, Bryce was able to kind of be one of those things. I'll use a terrible example, but the Reggie Dunlop, and be a player coach, not head coach, but a player assistant coach. And I always found that kind of fascinating. I've always wondered why, especially in Europe, I wondered why they've never had that as well, because I feel like a lot of teams only have the budget for maybe one assistant, but it would also be beneficial to have a second assistant where it could be someone who's still playing. So kind of share your experience on that.
Yeah, so I did that for officially it was last year and then the beginning of this year. But even my um, first year in Greenville, I did a little bit towards the end of the year. Um, Even actually in Cardiff too, I helped with the recruiting in the summer. So I have a lot of experience watching players and doing pre-scout, but my responsibilities last year in Greenville, I was very busy in terms of I would help out with the apartments. I was basically in charge of the guys living situations, just like getting them settled in the apartments. If they left in terms of getting traded or released, I would check them out, make sure there's no damage. I would help with pre-scout. I would help with the recruiting. Um, I helped a little bit with immigration this summer. I did some hotel booking this summer. I dipped my hands into everything almost, and it was a very, very good learning experience. I learned a lot, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to see all of that firsthand and see how much the head coach and the assistant coach has to do at this level. It's actually remarkable that it's just those two guys, and then on top of that, they got to do the actual coaching. So I mean, you don't really have it's kind of hard to have a life if that's something if you want to choose to be a coach at that level. But I'm sure, I mean, it's rewarding if you can get a team together of guys and they'll win for you and want to play for you. But there's just a lot of work that you wouldn't think needs to be done that's done by just a two-man team.
Mm-hmm. Do you care to share some of those examples or?
What like in terms of what examples of?
Well, just like obviously, I think there's like a lot of people would be like, okay, like Bryce, you'd probably have to do like maybe some video or like organize maybe a skill session. But there's some like even like smaller stuff like organizing stuff that people might not like realize like, okay, like this guy's having to focus on playing, but he's also, doing this when he gets off the ice, like so it's a long day for you in a sense.
Oh yeah, okay. So like when we would have community events, just because in North America you're always trying to build your fan base, and in the smaller cities where hockey's not big, you want to get your players out in the community and just basically sell your brand or help out kids at school. So another one of my responsibilities would be the front office would say we need four guys to go to a school on this day. So I would coordinate with those four guys, and then the media relations guy, I would coordinate the two groups, and we would set up those guys getting there and what they're going to do. So that's another example where someone probably wouldn't think yeah, their player coach is doing that. Booking hotels this summer, I don't think there's many player coaches that did that either.
Hmm.
Immigration, another thing. Doing the Canadian guys' immigration is another thing. Trying to think what else non-hockey that was just different. I mean, the apartment thing too, being in charge of the living, making sure there's no damage in the apartments, coordinating with the booster club a little bit in terms of because all the apartments that you live in over there, like here, are furnished, but it's not like over here. The homes are all owned by, or the apartments are all owned by individuals. Where the ECHL, you're just living at a regular apartment complex, so you got to go out and get furniture. So coordinating with the billets about moving in furniture at the beginning of the season. So stuff like that, just random things.
Yeah, it sounds like you had to do a lot. Um, So we have about 5.5 minutes left on my Zoom free 40-minute meeting. I just got a notification, so gonna have to buzz through these last questions quick. But just quick, like one quick one is like, how long do you plan on playing for? How many more years do you think you got?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I guess I got to wait and see what kind of opportunities present themselves. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a time limit. Luckily, knock on wood, my body is holding up, and I don't have any lingering issues, which is huge. So if I do decide to step away from the game, it would be on my own terms, which is good. So I don't have a time frame.
That's fair. Take it year by year. When you look back on your career, so obviously you're 33 years old, turning 34. Do you think you would have had the career you've had when you look back, maybe when you were playing junior?
I don't know. That's a good question. Probably not after my first year of college, just because it didn't go as planned at all. I mean, my first couple of years were very hard. Um, I was hurt, a couple bad injuries, and then just didn't really get the opportunity to play. So I think after those 2 years, I don't think looking back, I don't know if, or looking forward, I don't think I would have played this long now.
And then the last two questions. So one, life after playing. Are you planning on staying involved in hockey or are you gonna completely switch to something else?
No, I will do something in hockey. I don't know what, but I will stay in the game in some capacity.
That's good. I think the more hockey minds we have staying involved, I think the game can only grow. And lastly, so this is a question that I plan on asking all the guests in the future. As I said, I wanted this really to be an educational podcast for hopefully the young listeners that are, coming up the ranks in hockey right now. What is one piece of advice, or maybe if you have multiple pieces of advice, you would give your younger self? So, what I mean is, when I look back on my career and how it transpired and everything I went through, what I would tell myself at the age of 16, 17, 18. So, for me, my personal answer would be you got to work a lot harder in the gym off the ice because I was always a guy that got away with my talent level. I was a talented goalie, and I didn't really put in the work in the summer as much because every year I was having success. So I felt, okay, I don't need to work hard off the ice. And then that really was eye opening once I got to college. So what would you kind of share to the younger generation here?
It would probably be the same. I mean, I would say I was someone who always worked really hard just because of who my dad was and seeing what he did, and he had to work hard because of his unfortunate the way he was born, I guess is the best way to say it. But yeah, working hard was something I always did, but I think something that can help you work even harder is you always got to remind yourself, for as hard as you're working, there's someone working harder than you. So I think that always mentally pushed me to work harder.
That's
So that
definitely, yeah, that's definitely something that I agree with. And yeah, I guess we do have time for one more question, so I will ask it since you just brought it up. A big thing today is obviously equality in hockey. So as you said, your dad is black, and you are half black. Is that something that kind of throughout your life have kind of dealt with some things going on in hockey, or has hockey, at least in your experience, always been welcoming and kind of what they're uh, promoting today is equality for everybody, no matter what race, you know, sexual, anything like that?
I myself, I've never experienced anything um, disrespectful in regards to my heritage, but I mean, I can now that I'm getting older, I am very grateful for what my dad did for like future generations. I think what he went through, I mean, I can only imagine what he went through back then when it was so sociably acceptable to do those type of things. I mean, I couldn't imagine. So I mean, I have the utmost respect for him and making it as far as he did, and uh, winning a Stanley Cup. I mean, I know he did not have it easy, and I think he definitely paved the way for a lot of other guys um, that are black now playing in the NHL, as he was one of the first few that did it.
I definitely agree. Bryce, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your story, and yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. We'll talk to you soon.